Tim Tobin, it's great to have you on MedTech Unboxed.
Thanks very much. I appreciate you making some time for me.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. When somebody reached out to me originally to talk about a scalpel, I was like, really? Honestly, of all these MedTech novel, minimally invasive applications, my first impression, I have to be honest with you, I was like, I don't think so. But then as I looked into the company more, and I'll let you talk about what you do and highlight what your mission is, but it's compelling, the whole story and the technology platform and how you kind of started in a different industry and have applied it to medtech. I don't want to get ahead of it. I'll let you go through it. But as I learned more about it, I became very interested, and here we are today.
That's funny you say that, because I mean, the way the entrepreneurial journey is, right? It goes up and down and all around, and you find your way. And in hindsight, I look and I say, I wish we'd started on something other than the scalpel,
Yeah.
A higher value add product.
But
the positive side is we had so many learnings from that, and we were able to refine the technology because, it's so tiny.
Yeah.
That we now can apply it to, pretty much any surgical cutting instrument. And so we didn't get to the commercialization side, the licensing quite as fast, but we had a ton of learnings that are really beneficial now.
Excellent. Yeah. So why don't we start there and kind of give us a high level overview of Planatome's mission and what, the whole concept of nano-polishing to support better outcomes and better healing for patients.
Sure. Okay. So I'll give you just kind of a little background about how the company, the technology of the company, where it came from, and then kind of what we're doing, our business model now. So the nano-polishing came out of the semiconductor manufacturing world, which was my background for years and years and years. So Planatome is actually a spin out from a company my business partner and I started, a company called Intrepix. We ran for about 24 years, and we sold it a couple of years ago. We specialized in a polish process, this nano polish, where we polish the surface of wafers. Chips are made on wafers.
Mm-hmm.
So it's literally almost perfectly atomically smooth. So if you were to measure the surface roughness when we're done polishing, it's like taking a hair out of your head. You look at the little round end of that, you cut that up 15 or 20,000 times, and you take one piece, right? I mean, that's how fine a surface finish we put on it. So, and we're doing that for really big name companies like, Samsung and Intel and Facebook and Apple and you name it. And one day, our CFO in a strategy session said, here we are, this small $20, $25 million a year company, but developing these technologies for really big name companies. He said, where else, what other industries will pay for technology and have products that could benefit from it? And we said, that's a great question. I mean, we developed a portfolio bigger than anybody else in the entire world of what we could apply this technology to. So we started looking, we looked in medical, aerospace, defense, and automotive. We actually found applications that we think will be really cool in all of them, but the medical was the one we thought was the most compelling, and we really got excited about it. So that's where we started, right? Applying it to surgical instruments. So this Planatome is actually a spin out from Intrepix, the company we sold before, and we.
Okay. Going from semiconductor to medtech, it sounds like a real logical choice, but I guess you probably, I don't know if you realized it initially, but you probably realize it now, some of the barriers to entry related to regulatory and things like that. I'm sure that's kind of a hurdle that you have to overcome.
Yeah, there were a lot of learnings, particularly. There's the technical ones.
Yeah.
Great team, they get through it, but the market and the business model and those types of things, channels to market, regulatory things. We're fortunate in that our technology, we take it and apply it to existing devices. So we're not manufacturing, we're just adding one more process in there.
Right.
But that said, what we found, while there weren't big regulatory hurdles, in the US, these are class 1 devices.
Yeah.
In EU or Korea, they're class 2, still pretty
right.
But what we found was that the channel to market, there are really big players that are in the market that dominate the channels, and you've got to we learned that we needed to, let's just go and license it to them rather than trying to, our thought at first was commercialize it, to some degree, and then license the technology off. And we looked at the amount of, millions of dollars we're going to have to invest in that. And it just doesn't make sense. Let's just go to these big name players that are in place already and just license it to them. So that's really what we are. We take our IP, our patents, and we license it to big manufacturers.
That's a good point, because the scale of that distribution from those big players is just mammoth. And that's a huge barrier. So I understand why you took that approach. And gosh, that's one of the reasons why you see so many acquisitions in that space, right? To build that scale and distribution and those sales channels within MedTech and the hospitals.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, we even just something fairly minor like looking at a scalpel blade manufacturing, that to invest in the manufacturing capacity ourselves and the sales force. They're very it's expensive, and we would have to raise a lot more money, and we've been very judicious about not diluting too much, but we've done it now with the business model we have here.
Okay. You said market a minute ago, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the market. What is the market for this? And we talked earlier, and you had a slide. I want to talk about that, and then certainly go over the Nano-Polishing technology platform. Where would you like to start there?
Yeah. Why don't we? We touched on what Planatome is to begin with, so why don't we show the market, right? Estimates, players, that kind of a thing. I think everybody will have a pretty good idea of what that is. So
okay.
Let's see here. I should be able to share.
Yeah, while you're doing that, I was telling you about. I read the white paper that you provided, or I found on your website. And just one thing before you want to start this, it's amazing. That scalpel's been around for 1,000 years, it said, and there has been no real development in that technology since 1915, right?
Yeah.
That's
amazing. The scalpel blade was patented in 1915 by I think it was Curtis Parker, which became Bard Parker. And that was the disposable scalpel blade, and really nothing's been done to it since that time, except it's gone down the commodity path, drive down the cost, drive down the cost. So
gotcha.
Some limited differentiations, but not a major one.
Okay.
So
all right, let's talk about the market here.
Yeah. So again, Planatome, it's a patented technology platform. So our goal is to take what we have, it's technology from the semiconductor manufacturing world, making the most advanced chips in the world, and we apply it to different devices. We show the clinical benefits, the economic benefits, and then we go approach the industry leaders, which we've just started doing that this second quarter of this year. So that's kind of where we are in our evolution, and we're getting great reception. And then we license it to them such that they can implement it, just like one more process that they put into their manufacturing process, and then they'll have the most advanced surgical cutting instruments in the world. So we've segmented it. Right now it's surgical cutting instruments that we're doing. The applications for this are beyond that, actually, into many other things in the medical world, and also industries outside, which will take our technology there at some point. But we've segmented it so far just for the surgical cutting instruments. Mm-hmm. And really, the robotic, we talked briefly about the robotic surgery. We have tremendous interest there, because what our technology does is, in addition to the clinical benefits, which we'll talk about in a minute, when we removed all of the defects and polished the surface of the device so perfect, you get economic benefits that make devices last, up to 5 times as long, like with surgical cutting scissors. With robotic surgery, that's essentially the business model that most of them are going down, at least the folks in the soft tissue, like Intuitive, Johnson & Johnson's Otava, Medtronic's Hugo, CMR, folks like that, where the instruments are well over 50% of the business, and they're limited life reusable instruments. So however long they make it, when we can make them last longer, it drops more money to earnings, and happier customers, lowers the COGS, you name it.
Absolutely. Interesting.
And that
big market,
goes,
8.4 billion.
Yeah, and that's the SAM, right?
Uh,
We narrowed it down. We cut it down. So like this one's 2.2, 2.1,
okay.
1.5. So with these over here. But as you can see, not just robotic. While this is the biggest financial payback so far, at
Hmm.
least that we've explored. Ortho, the instruments, bone saws, screws, all those are considered cutting instruments. Traditional scalpel, what you always think of, scalpel,
Yeah.
scissors, that kind of a thing. But also the repair and the reprocessing, as well as the non-MIS stuff.
Interesting.
But
Tell me about the reprocessing. They have these scalpels currently reprocessed, and what does that entail?
yeah, the scalpel blades, they don't reprocess them
Okay.
so much, but a lot of the single use disposable devices now get reprocessed.
Okay.
And some of them are sharpened by, Stryker has a facility right here in town, actually.
Hmm.
Johnson & Johnson, I don't remember the name of they have a company they own that does it as well. So all these folks have where they will collect instruments from the hospitals or surgery centers. They bring them back in, they either resharpen them, clean them, package them again, sterilize them so they can go out and be reused again. So it's actually a very big segment of the market. Stryker got in because they purchased a company here in town. I don't recall the name of it, but
Okay.
um, that's how all these guys are getting them. But we've had great interest there as well.
Interesting. Okay.
So
Great. Thanks for sharing that. It's always great to see the market and the market size and the players. So appreciate
yeah,
you
there's
sharing that.
some big players. Do you want me to kind of show a little bit about the technology? Because
Yes, please. That'd be great.
even though it's really high tech in terms of the chemistry and physics to
Yeah.
make this process happen, but it's really simple. Let me try to get this to go to the next one here. Okay, in concept, it's really simple what we're doing. So this is actually a scalpel blade, but it doesn't matter what you're talking about, whether it's scissors, scalpel blades, staplers, which have a little cutting device on it. Anything that's made out of stainless steel in a surgical cutting instrument is made because they take medical grade stainless and they grind it up to a point with diamond grit wheels. So you can see it leaves this very rough surface at the end. So this is looking side profile here of a scalpel blade. So, if you're looking like right there at the side edge of that, it looks a little bit like Camelback Mountain if you've been here to Phoenix,
Yeah.
And then if you look straight down on the edge, so if you're looking straight at the edge that does the cutting, that's this line right here. And you can see how, serrated and jagged. And we didn't go looking for the worst one. This is the number one blade in the world. This is the best one out there. Everybody else looks worse. So, yeah.
That's 5,000x.
This is 5,000x. You can really see how these things grab and snag. And this is at 1,000x.
Okay.
So if you look then, what kind of cutting does that do? Just as you would imagine, it's really more of a snagging and tearing and ripping out. So you can see how this is just pig's feet, and this is only at 22x. See the tissue, how it's all ripped out and elongated. That takes a lot more time to heal that. And here's just at 180x. You can see how the cells have been stretched out and really been beat up. Right, it's going to take longer to heal. It's going to be more difficult to heal. So we buy it looking like this. All we do is polish it, and this is what it looks like when we're done.
Okay.
It's
wow.
It's actually so simple, right? I mean, we say it's elegant in its simplicity, because then if you have a device that looks like this, as you'd imagine, the cut is much smoother, much cleaner. So that leads to huge clinical benefits, which we'll talk about in a second, but also economic benefits. And again, we did it looking for the clinical benefits. I wish I could say we had the foresight to say, oh yeah, we'll get economic benefits too. But we found them, going through the commercialization process, because these serrations here that give you the very jagged cuts, that's also the failure mechanism, because they either bend over and break off, or they gunk up with tissue. Both of which make the device stop cutting. Well, we get rid of that to get the clinical benefits. So our devices last way, way, way longer, usually until something either damages the edge, they hit something hard, or or something like that, or eventually it'll just wear out. But it's at least 5 times longer than a standard device. So,
Compelling.
yeah, now we're in the process of doing it with robotic scissors. They also put a current through there, so theirs is a little bit more challenging and rough on the cutting edge. But we've got really impressive data that we're starting to gather with that.
That's surgical robotic type application.
Yeah, they're monopolar curved scissors. So getting a current that goes through there, it's kind of like combining scissors with a bovie, right? You're cauterizing,
right,
coag, which chars tissue. There's a number of things from that.
Okay. Excellent.
So that, as you imagine, leads to some great clinical benefits, which I can go into the clinical benefits, or if you've got some questions, we can.
Yeah, let's definitely go into the clinical benefits. We were talking about, are you going to share, do you want to share more, or are you finished sharing?
I can share the clinical benefits. If you want to see more, I can.
Yeah, definitely. Because, healing clinical benefits, I was telling you when we first spoke about so much work goes into minimally invasive catheters to lower the profile of the catheters. One, to put more, to thin the wall basically and make them smaller, to put more devices, drugs, whatever within the lumen. Two, to make them more flexible so we can reach further within the tortuous anatomy. And three, related to what you're doing is healing, right? The incision, smaller incision size, less time to heal. And that's kind of what we're going into now. So it's a huge investment into smaller catheters, thinner walls, and this kind of plays right along with it in a way, even though we're talking about two different devices, but it's the same challenge and same hopefully outcome. So I'll let you go ahead. Yeah, you
got to heal better, right? So
less time in the hospital. You talked about the money, the financial benefits. So I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we've done a bunch of preclinical and clinical work. A lot of it came from either University of Chicago Medical Center or the Asan Medical Center in Seoul, as well as some private practitioners. So, but if I kind of summarize it in the main categories here, again, thinking about the fact that you're slicing instead of tearing things out, as you would imagine, you get much lower inflammation. So 50 to 60% less collagen deposition. Collagen just makes a wound swell. It stays open longer, more infections, that kind of a thing. We also have an 8x reduction in TGF beta and a 2.5x reduction in macrophage density. So all of that reduces inflammation significantly.
Can you explain that a little bit, TGF beta, what that means?
Yeah, TGF beta is again, my background's semiconductor. So I promise you there's going to be some really advanced medical folks that are going to say, well, he's off a little bit. But it's essentially an enzyme or protein that is, when you have more TGF beta or more macrophage, that means you've had more trauma, and that's rushing in to help heal things. Gotcha. It's also an indicator. Some of the studies will link it to pain. The higher TGF beta means you've had more trauma, more pain. So we believe that it would be less pain as well for folks. Certainly an indicator for it.
Makes sense. Thanks for explaining that.
Yeah, for sure. So, and from a standpoint of recovery, again, if you don't have as much swelling, you have in 3 days' time, you can see here, this was side-by-side incisions in guinea pigs. In 3 days' time, 90% wound closure with the Planatome, only 10% wound closure with a traditional scalpel blade.
Wow.
So, the longer the site stays open, the more chance there is for surgical site infections. And even if it's just a small incision for something minimally invasive, I guarantee you the patient wants that to heal as well as possible, and the doctor would as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and those incisions, a lot of times they use, because of bleeding, a closure device, another device, and then there's always complications, hematomas, and things like that. These other after effects. Yeah,
100%. So, and we have less bleeding that comes from it, less trauma, less nerve damage. All studies that show all those published studies that show all of that. So, one of the benefits that we found out, now this is a 3-year, 114 patient study. Are you familiar with hypertrophic scarring or keloiding?
Yeah.
Okay. So 3 years, 140 14 patient study, 57 that had the conventional blade and 57 that had the Planatome blade facelifts. It was from Dr. Aguyo, Mayo trained plastic surgeon in El Paso. So the darker your skin tone, the more prone you are to keloiding and hypertrophic scarring. When he looked at and compared the data, 86% reduction in adverse scarring events just by switching the blade. That's the only difference. Same surgeon, so he had the same technique, same everything, just switching the blade, which is remarkable.
That is amazing.
Yeah, that's about to get published. I know it's been submitted, the paper for that, so that should be published really soon.
Okay.
So, and then lastly, because of all the benefits to lower inflammation and lower trauma, there's a lot of surgeries that medical professionals will avoid doing on diabetics because it's very difficult for them to heal.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of researchers over at the Asan Medical Center, JP Hong and JW Choi, that said, your blade, we can see it because they're reconstructive microsurgeons. Your blade does so little damage. We think we can actually do things on diabetic patients now that we wouldn't have tried otherwise. So they did a study where they compared a diabetic population, rat population, and a healthy rat population, Planatome blade versus conventional blade. And then they looked at all three phases of wound healing, inflammation, proliferation, and maturation. And in all three, the diabetic rat with the Planatome blade healed better than a healthy rat with a conventional blade, except one. And that one, they were equivalent. So, diabetic wound complications, pretty much any immunocompromised wound complication, we believe this can have a great impact to it.
It's so broad.
Yeah.
The benefits. It's amazing.
Yeah, and this is just what we've touched upon now.
Yeah, so that kind of leads us to the next question, like what's the future? What are some of the next gen applications, therapies that this technology can be applied to?
Sure. There's a host of them in that market slide we talked about there before.
Yeah.
We've now applied this to scalpel blades, rongeurs, curettes, reamers, shavers, robotic assisted scissors, all types of regular open scissors, Mayos, Metzenbaums, Iris, tenotomy, you name it, big and small. Next, we'll be looking at like bone saws for orthopedic, drill bits, screws, things that you can have little burrs on, just like you saw on the scalpel blade, that either weaken a bone or put a crack in things. So, we think we're going to get a lot of clinical benefits, and getting all the clinical benefits really reduce the post-operative complications that you have.
So. Can you share a little bit? I know we talked a little earlier about regulatory and you were talking about clinical benefits. I mean, are these, you talked about class 1, are these cleared now or are you working through? It's not preclinical, right? You're past. It's
correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Just if you can kind of give us where you're at in that stage.
So again, we take our technology and just apply it to an existing device. So
right.
We didn't have to go for the same kind of clinical approval. We did get approval from the standpoint of we need to be ISO, our GMP certification, which we have. Most of the devices we're talking about, scissors, scalpel blades. In the United States, they're a class 1, which is the lowest regulatory device. So as long as we have GMP, we're fine. So what we do is we really take the technology, apply it to different devices as we're talking to surgeons. We largely try to stay in the Phoenix area. There's a good smattering of surgeons of all sorts of different things, neurosurgeons, plastic, orthopedic, you name it. And we apply it to the devices that they say that they believe has the most room for improvement. And then they start looking at what that is. And, and then we approach the companies that are actually manufacturing these. And we start talking with them about taking our technology, putting it into their manufacturing line. And then we just get a license, a royalty fee.
That makes sense. It's not a new device. You're filling some gaps,
Right.
that needs with the predicate devices. So
Right.
yeah,
And a lot of times, even the manufacturing process doesn't change all that much for these folks. Like the very last thing they'll do is that grind process. And there's
yeah,
usually probably 2 or 3 grinds, right? They're
yeah.
going to drop the last one and replace it with our Nano-Polish. So it's, not even a major change in the manufacturing process. It's really minor.
Right.
And as long as they've got sterilization and everything all done, we're in really good shape.
Okay. Where are you privately held? Is it a public company? Can you talk a little bit about the
Sure.
business from that perspective?
Yeah. So again, Planatome was a spin out from a company called Intrepix that my business partner Steve and I started back in 1998, and then we sold it in 2003 to a public semiconductor company here in town. When we did that, again, I mentioned we had developed the largest portfolio of these polish processes in the entire world. We signed away our rights to use any of that in semiconductor, so we'll never go into that again. But we maintained our rights to use it and have developed more IP, filed more patents, been granted for medical and many things outside of semiconductor. So when we spun the company out, we started a Series A round. Okay. So we are privately held. We did a Series A round, and it's Phoenix, so we don't quite have the you won't hear the glitz of like a Silicon Valley. Yeah. Oh, we raised $200 million.
Yeah.
But for Phoenix, we did $8 million of friends and family, and a couple surgeons that have been early on in the technology, and we since we are an IP licensing model, we don't think we're ever going to need to go and get that big investment from a VC or a PE, right, which they can bring great benefits, and strategically there might be a reason to do that at some point. But if you don't, if you can keep control and keep yourself focused on the things you need to do without diluting that much, it's a nice place to be. At least that's the path we've taken.
Absolutely. Interesting. Well, hey, this has been a really interesting conversation. And like I told you, my first impression when I was approached about this was like, I don't know about that, but as I dug into it, as I dug into it and learned about the nano-polishing, the metallurgy, and the therapies and the applications, especially the surgical robotics, seems like there's a huge opportunity there. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing this technology platform with us.
Absolutely. And that reaction, by the way, is the same thing we get from surgeons a lot of times. Why I say I wish we hadn't started with the scalpel blade, right? If we'd started with the surgical robotics,
right.
There's nobody we've spoken with so far in the surgical robotics that didn't get really excited. They all have the same issue with like scissors and cutting instruments. So
some of those metrics that you threw out there about even the percentage of revenue, like an intuitive that goes towards these the instruments, right? Surgical
61% of their $8.35 billion last year was instruments and accessories. It's huge.
I look forward to following you guys.
Fantastic. I really appreciate the time and the interest and enjoyed the conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tim.
Great. Thanks, Steve.
All right.